And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter as always. My name is Nick from P2W Fantasy. I am here today on a Tuesday, back at it with two great guests. One who I've had the pleasure of linking up with in the past, and then one that I'm talking to for the first time that I've been very excited about. So we have a great show cut out for us today, hitting on some good topics here, the Expo, some hot takes, and more. But before we talk about anything, I want to make sure that I introduce both of these guests. And again, I've been very excited about this podcast. So I'll start off with Bob Lung. Bob, 2021 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. That consistency guide has been very, highly touted for the last handful of years, done very well. It's on Amazon. You can there. Big Guy Fantasy Sports, the website, so many different things on that website. You have multiple podcasts, there's tools, prop bets, DFS, football information just in general. I know you have the Kings Classic as well. And you're the man behind the Expo. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But Bob, thank you for joining the show. Can you tell everybody, of course, where to find you and then a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. Always an honor to be able to come. Anybody who asks me to come on a show to me is an honor. It's like, thank you. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
On Twitter at Bob_Lung. So it's pretty simple because at Bob Lung was taken by some guy in England who raises pigeons and he has 3 followers. So
that's not you then.
That thing will go away and I'll actually get it without the underscore. But for now, yeah, we're going to go with that. As you said, you pretty much identified everything. You can find me at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, doing the Kings Classic, doing the Expo, doing the Consistency Guide on Amazon, all those great places to get things. And so looking forward to talking about a lot of that today. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Can you give us just like a brief background about that consistency guide? Because I've actually seen people on Twitter just posting pictures saying like, hey, it came in, I got it. So what's that all about?
So it's interesting. So I created my kind of concept of consistency in 2002 and wrote about it for years on many different sites, kind of gaining street cred per se. And for quite a number of years prior, so probably starting 10 years ago, I had people ask me to write like an article about the importance of consistency, and I'd put it in their magazine that they were selling on their shelf. So guys like the Fantasy Football Guide that Peter Schweister puts out. I'm trying to think of other ones. Fanball, Roto Experts put one out. I was in. So, so I was always excited about being in it, even if it was 1 or 2 pages. But I always looked at the player profiles and thought, man, I've got all this consistency data. Man, we could just add that to the profiles. And you could say, okay, here's all this information, but here's some tidbits of consistency that are in it. But everybody was kind of like, Bob, we'd love to. We think it's a great idea, but we don't have any room in our, we're barely squeezing in what we got. So finally, again, 5 years ago, I think I read or somebody brought up the fact of like, you can self-publish your own book on Amazon. I'm like, really? Okay. So that's what I did. And, like I said, I think the amazing thing to me is 1, that anybody bought it. 2, that it's been nominated 4 straight years for Best Fantasy Football Publication by the Fantasy Sports Writers of America organization, and that I won it in 2018. I mean, at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I've done.
Yep.
What more do I need to accomplish? But it still amazes me. Now selling 2,000-3,000 copies a year. Like I said, people putting pictures of it online. Yep. I mean, I just showed this to my family. They're like, "What? Really? Do these people even know you?" I'm like, "No." so it's fun. It's cool. It's what makes this whole community really really cool, really nice. Like you said, I probably speak more to people online than I speak to my own kids. So.
Yeah, we were mentioning that before the podcast, just talking about some of the people we've connected with on, Twitter or the fantasy community, and it's crazy the connections you make. But yeah, you guys can actually check that consistency guide out. If you go to Bob's profile, it's actually tagged on this live stream. You can click on his profile and get the link straight from there. So again, thanks for coming on, Bob. Also on the podcast, I got my buddy John McGlynn. So John McGlynn, Commissioner Evaluation Pod through GOAT District. I actually had the pleasure of being invited on and talking with John. That was a great time. He was a great host, so I got to return the favor and hopefully be an okay host for him as well. John's always talking fantasy on Twitter, constant opinions. I know you're a commissioner for a handful of leagues. you and I are in a home league that you just created with some great people from the fantasy community that I'm very excited about. Quick fun fact, me and John met on fantasy Twitter. We live like 2 minutes away from each other, so we've actually had the pleasure of having some beers together and hanging out. So, John, as always, it's great to connect with you. Can you tell everybody where to find you on social media and what you got going on, man?
Yeah, I'm not quite as advantageous as you guys are. I just do this for fun. But thanks for having me, Nick. Love your show, love your videos, love your content. Love that we found each other in this Twitter machine. Always nice to find new neighbors that also like to watch Red Zone, drink some beers, talk fantasy football with. And all of you out there in the Twitter world can find me at John McGlynn 75. I'm part of the GOAT District podcast, and that's where you can find my show that I do for fun. It's called the Commissioner Evaluation. On my show, I have my guests answer a series of questions about themselves. We hit whatever NFL news is going on. We talk about juicy NFL floating, rumors are floating around. It's like a soap opera on fantasy football. So I throw some commissioner questions at them and ask them how long they've been playing for and what their favorite settings are, league sizes, other commissioner-related topics. And then I run some, like Nick said before, I run a series of home leagues that are filled with local peeps I found on Twitter. Some Facebook fantasy football groups I found some guys on, and I sprinkle some of my own friends who've been playing for a long time with me. I've been playing since 1997, so some of my guys are pretty seasoned veterans too. They fit right in with some of these leagues. And then at the end, we comb through a team. This someone submits, and we talk about if we want to make it a rebuild, remodel, and what moves you make that could possibly make this team to get back on track to being a contender, or to break it down and start from scratch. So that's my podcast. That's what I do for fun. I do it every other week. I have nice guests on there, and it's people who interact with me on Twitter, like Nick. I got Bob Gilchrist coming up next week. A bunch of awesome people. I've had plenty of great guests. I plan on having plenty of more guests, and I just love this fantasy football community. It's what I do this is my hobby. This is my passion. This is my fun. And like everybody else in here, we're here for a reason to have a good time and compete with each other.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just speaking from experience as a guest on the podcast, I had a great time, and it felt more like I was sitting having a good conversation with a friend versus like a robotic, uptight, scripted show. So I really appreciated that. So what we have going on today, if you are listening live or on iTunes later on or whatever the case is, we are going to talk about the Fantasy Expo because we have the man behind the expo on the podcast, and we also have two people who are going to be at that expo. We also are going to go into some hot takes because it's that time of year from the fantasy community. So I actually have some good videos from some guys I consider friends, their hot takes, and then the three of us will talk about if we think that it's possible to happen in 2021. So before we get going on any of that, I do want to say this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group. FantasyPoints.com is my one-stop shop for everything I do, whether it's an article, a podcast. I'm just looking to get some advice on a trade. I want to prove a point. Whatever the case is, I go to FantasyPoints.com, and I highly suggest it if you want one place to go. So FantasyPoints.com/subscribe. If you want a promo code, it is 21WIN10.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win.
All right, so first topic I want to touch on, especially since we have Bob here, is the Fantasy Expo. Sunday, August 15th in Canton, Ohio. Bob, my first question to you is, how long have you been organizing events like this? And maybe a part B to this, how'd you even get started by doing something like this? Your name's on everything associated with it. You're doing a lot of work behind the scenes that I'm sure I can't even describe right now. But yeah, how did it become a thing?
So I was born and raised and still live in beautiful Canton, Ohio, which is home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So growing up as a kid, I went to all of the games sitting on metal seats, metal stands, in the older version stadium, watching the Hall of Fame game, watching the Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremonies. literally on the front steps of the hall with about 200 people watching. They had a hometown parade. And to me, who lived in a little town south of Canton then, of maybe 400 people, going to Canton was a big deal. Watching this stuff at the Hall of Fame and the parade and the Hall of Fame players, George Blanda and, Jim Brown, as a boy that was just, wow, I can't believe I'm so blessed to live in this cool town. Now, if you ask my 3 daughters that question,
maybe different stories.
About it. It's a whole different story. But, so I grew up that way. I grew up here. But then I've also watched the Hall of Fame grow from something like that small into this massive 5-day event of games and huger parades. Like our Hall of Fame parade is the largest non-holiday parade in the country. The enshrinement has got 30,000 people packed into a football stadium. The game, the parties, the events is just nonstop. Now, I've even got the pleasure and the privilege of being a enshrinee driver for the last 30 years. So I'm on the inside driving guys like John Lynch, Brian Dawkins, awesome. Champ Bailey, Al Davis, John Madden, and they ride there. I'm their chauffeur for 4 or 5 days.
Awesome.
And, like I said, I got stories that can last forever, but I watched that grow. So the community pride, I have pride in our fantasy community, and I know you guys have that, but this is pride in my own community. How can I bring those together? And for probably the last 10 years, that's been in the back of my mind of why isn't the fantasy world enjoying Canton, Ohio, and why isn't Canton, Ohio embracing the fantasy community? And so I did a couple other small little things with the fantasy community in the Hall of Fame a couple of times back 6-7 years ago. It was okay. But, I really always envisioned this, just like the Hall of Fame weekend, having fantasy football's greatest weekend, where everybody comes and we're all here and we do all this cool stuff together. And, so doing the same thing, but just in a different way. So it first started with the Kings Classic 4 years ago. I wanted to have basically fantasy football's best of the best drafting live inside the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I wanted SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio to be there to promote it live, just like they do with the Tout Wars and Labor on the baseball side. And so, again, 4 years ago, I reached out to Mike Clay, who'd become a friend of mine from ESPN. And I said, Mike, here's my idea. What do you think? And he laughed, I wasn't talking to him. He sends back an LOL and just forwards the email that he had got from Brad Evans, literally a week before that. And it said, hey, I've got this idea for having this best of best draft in the country, but I don't know where to hold it. And I went,
the light bulb was going off.
Brad need to talk.
Yep.
So we did. And that's where the Kings Classic came about. And for the last 4 years, of course, not counting last year, we've been live at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So that was kind of like day one. Now it's like, okay, now day two, I need something else to do. And the expo came about from 2 years ago when a bunch of the fantasy community had went down to Dallas for the Tony Romo National Fantasy Convention, whatever it's called. And they were complaining about how expensive it was. It was too big. There really wasn't a lot of fantasy stuff there. It was more about signing autographs and meeting players. And boy, I wish we had some kind of fantasy football expo that we could call our own. And I said, hey, how about Canton, Ohio? And now we threw it together in about 2-3 months. Literally, that was May, and we did it in August. I won't say it was successful, but it was a good start. We did sell out all the booths. Everybody came into town. The Kings Classic was the day before. The Expo was the day after. We had this big party at BW3s, and then everybody got to hang out with all the big wigs. So, Andy Behrens, Brad Evans, Mike Clay, Marcus Grant, Dave Richards, Bob Harris, you name them. So we're all hanging out in BW3 together, drinking beers, watching preseason football and hanging out. And after that weekend, a lot of people said, man, that was so cool that whole weekend of hanging out and seeing these people and hanging with the best of the best. And, the expo was neat, and then of course 2020 came. So when 2021 came, I thought, well, okay, let's do this, so I got a new website built and I put it out there March 13th. And just like you had said, Nick, I think maybe off when we were earlier talking, the hype machine kicked in to 11. I mean, it was just, and it's still unbelievable to me. I mean, the signups, the registrations, the booth sales, it's just like I couldn't stop. Like, thank goodness I was working from home, because I'm like sliding back and forth between work computer and this computer, just trying to keep up with people. Like, okay, thank you for registering. Here's your information. What booth number do you want? I mean, it was just that crazy. And obviously it's a little bit of a perfect storm. We were all caught up, hunkered down for a year. We knew by August we'd all probably be in pretty good shape because of vaccinations and stuff like that. Yep. So I think people saw it as let's get in this now and let's get locked in like you did. And now even more people, of course, I think they're getting vaccinated and so that's kind of how this all came about. A little bit of luck, a little bit of right place at the right time, but in really the whole thing has been so much support from the fantasy community. Like you said, man, next thing I know, I got guys asking me, hey, I'd like to host a party. Hey, can I sponsor this? Hey, can I sponsor that? Hey, and it's, hey, I got this idea, draft night out, guys, so go to draftnightout.com, register to be in one of the drafts during the day on Saturday. They came to me and was like, hey, we want to do this draft night out thing. I said, well, we can't do it in the evening. Why don't you guys do it during the Kings Classic, like 10 to 4? So that way, anybody who isn't going to be in that can still do the drafts. We're doing it at a local brewery a few blocks down from the hotel. Prizes, they're giving away like auction stuff or raffles off like Kyler Murray helmets, Russell Wilson signed helmets.
Good stuff.
All kinds of cool stuff. So that's the great part about this community, is how it's all come together to help me help this to grow. And so I couldn't be more thankful to everybody out there who's been behind this, supporting in some way.
Everybody's got a vision, Bob, and what you're talking about right now is what everybody has, their vision of what they want to do, and you've accomplished it. And it's got to feel awesome being that guy who does this now. That everybody looks. I run 13 home leagues now. This year it's going to be 7. I got rid of a bunch of redraft ones, but I have 13 people in my home leagues that are all going to this the Fantasy Football Expo with me that I can go have beers with. Now we see each other all the time because it's home leagues, but there's guys that I'm going to be there and feel like I'm at home already. And then those guys know people, and those guys know people, and it's going to be like one big family. And thanks for doing this, man.
Well,
absolutely.
No, and thank you. I appreciate the kind words. The cool thing about all of this is that this is just this year. So whether you guys know this or not, the Hall of Fame Museum is building this massive village around it. So I've never been to Cooperstown, but they've explained it's kind of like that. So Cooperstown, there's the Baseball Hall of Fame, and there's this huge this huge village of shops and bars and restaurants and this and that and all kinds of things to do, so that you can come and not just go to the museum. The hall's doing the same thing. So they're going to build their own hotel, their own convention center, their own restaurants, bars. If gambling's approved, they're going to have their own sports book. Oh, and they're going to build their own water park. So all of a sudden, 5 years from now, this goes from a 200-300 people expo to a 2,000-3,000 people expo, because now dad can throw wife and kids in the car, bring them to Canton. They can hang out at the water park. Dad gets to go do the cool fantasy stuff that he's never allowed to do because he's married with kids. And we all are happy. That's the cool part. I've already talked to the vice president of events for the village, and I've explained this vision, and he's as on board as I am. He cannot wait to build this into that. So that's the cool part. It's not just we'll cap out at a couple hundred people for the next, we'll never get anywhere with it. No, this is going to be the fantasy football greatest weekend. This is what everybody was going to want to do, look forward to every year. It's the week after Hall of Fame weekend. So I told people, hell, then just make 2 weeks out of it, and then we'll just run them right
Yeah,
into each
yeah,
other.
yeah. Just have a big vacation that way. I agree. I think it's going to grow a ton just because I have so many people I talk to on a daily basis, just talking about, hey, who are you bringing? Where are you staying? You know, how are we going to meet
Right.
up on this day? And I've gotten cell phone numbers and things like that. And I think
Right.
word of mouth, and then when all of those pictures are going to be posted of guys
Right. Oh,
from
yeah.
different fantasy podcasts, hanging out, having a beer, like shaking hands. I mean, all that stuff
Right.
is just going to
Here's
make
me
people
and
want to
Brad
grow.
Evans. Yeah. Here's
Absolutely,
me and
absolutely.
Marcus Grant. Here's, all your
Everything.
favorite experts are going to be there. And most of them I've talked to are going to stick around. One of the cool things about the expo is from 10 to 11 that morning when it starts at 10 o'clock. 10 to 11 is called the pregame event. Now, I haven't promoted this per se yet because I haven't locked in all the guys I want, but here's the concept. On stage will be, I'm hoping, Mike Clay, Brad Evans, Andy Behrens, Mike Taglier, Bob Harris, Dave Richards, Michael Fabiano, like the names, the Mount Rushmore times 2 that will all be on stage. They're going to be interviewed by an MC. I don't think it'll be me. I think I'm working on somebody special. But for an hour, people are going to be asking questions. What are their sleepers? Who are their picks? And kind of that, never been done before scenario of here they are, folks. They're all right here. Take your pictures, post them all over Twitter. You're rarely going to get these all guys all together, and that's what's super cool about it. And they're all in. They're all like, yeah, Bob, I'll stick around for at least a couple hours. I'll get a later flight in the day or whatever. So Tags is already pretty much committed as well. Andy Behrens is committed. So.
Very cool. And something like that. I mean, we listen to a lot of these guys on podcasts, or we might see YouTube videos and things like that. But I don't think anything can beat the personal feeling of like sitting 10 yards away from guys and being able to just consume that, and then maybe saying what's up later on. And even guys that are not as big, just being able to go up, shake a hand, and say, hey, it was awesome having you on my podcast from California when I'm in Chicago. And what are we doing later on? Like things like that.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's the best part about the community is that you won't find too many people that have an ego, not in this group. That's one thing that 2 years ago, almost everybody thanked me for afterwards was just being there and being able to hang out with these guys and not feel like I was being talked down to because they were here and we're here. And then they said, now these people are coming on my podcast. They said, which I never would have even asked prior to this, because who am I to ask, Brad Evans to come on or Mike Clay to come on? And now, these guys went on a lot of these people's podcasts and they're like, that made such a big difference. And, so a little bit of networking doesn't hurt in this scenario as well, that we can all kind of meet and greet and kind of have that connection live. So that's going to be great.
I completely agree with that. And I think in the community, for people that are looking to grow their podcasts or grow as a content creator or just like grow with their knowledge base, I think networking is one of the biggest things personally for me that's helped me with a lot of my content and a lot of my friendships and things like that. So I think this is one of the easiest ways to make great connections, because you're going to be there. You're going to be there in person. Maybe it's not easy if you're traveling across the country, but I think it's well worth it, because I think in the fantasy community, networking is one of the biggest factors, regardless if some people want to admit it or not. I've had great people on my podcast. I've been on great podcasts. I've collaborated on articles, and I think that's just a way of gaining respect and getting more perspectives, and being in person is going to be awesome. I did want to ask John. So both John and I will be in attendance. I told Bob before the podcast, I think the news dropped like, I don't even know. Let's just say it was like a Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning I was on my laptop in the work office when I should have been working on something, signing up, getting the hotel, everything. So I've definitely been excited. John, what's your plan? Because I know you have been collaborating with some other people on road trips and staying here and doing this. So what's your plan for the expo, John?
Yeah, my plans for the expo are hopping in a car early Friday afternoon with Steven Johnson and possibly Dave Kluge. And we're checking the hotel, and I'm going to be a social butterfly all weekend. I met so many awesome people in this fantasy community, but I'm way more of a handshake and a smile kind of guy than I am, on the internet kind of, as far as that goes. So Not sure if we'll be hitting the Hall of Fame or the local burrito joints or whatever, but as my wife says, I could find a way to have a good time in an insurance seminar. So I'll have a great time at this event for sure.
Perfect.
Awesome. And I know I mentioned before the show, I talked to some guys in the fantasy community, like in group chats or texting on a daily basis, sometimes more than my own friends that live 5 minutes away. So I think just having the opportunity to obviously meet some new people, but meet the guys I've been talking to for the longest time in person is just going to be awesome. So I look forward to that like crazy. But yeah, absolutely. So Bob, if you had like a quick one-liner, or maybe it has to be a little bit more, but if somebody says just to you, like, why, we just talked about a lot of things, but they say, why should I go? Why should I go to the expo? We've pretty much hit that, but if you had to give them like a quick, here's your reason, what do you think would come to mind?
I guess I would ask the question back, why would you not?
I love it. Love it.
Boom.
Why would you want to miss this?
Absolutely.
I mean, the only thing stopping you should be money and time.
Absolutely.
So,
I love that. So again, Expo, I'm sure the three of us, we can shake hands in person following this podcast down the road here. But thank you again for coming on talking about that. I do want to shift gears now. I did ask recently some people from the fantasy community, because it's hot take season. You know, we're waiting on NFL news to drop. There's still a lot of time between now and the season, even though it's coming closer. But everybody's got hot take for what's going to happen. So I asked some people, hey, if you have a hot take, send me a video, because it's easy to tweet something, but sending a video I think is personal. And again, I do want to quickly drop this podcast partnered up with Fantasy Points Media Group. I forgot to play that graphic here. And we'll get into the first hot take. And the funny thing is, I got a handful of videos, but there's two sets of videos that guys say similar things. So I'm just going to play them back to back, because they're pretty much saying the same thing, which I kind of like, because it shows that, hey, maybe this hot take's not so hot for multiple people. But the first one here has to do with the Chargers. And I have my guy John June with the first clip.
Nick, man, what's going on? What's good, everybody? John June at JR Football Nerd on Twitter and Instagram, owner of Fantasy Football Diagnostics and host of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast, where you can catch redraft content, Dynasty, and DFS. Right now, we're one show a week, but in season, make sure you catch us 4 times a week. Just search FFDX in your search bar on most podcast platforms, and make sure to hit subscribe. My hot take in 2021 is that the Chargers, the LA Chargers, will boast 3 top 5 players, a triplet: Justin Herbert at quarterback, Austin Eckler at running back, Keenan Allen at wide receiver. Don't sleep on the Chargers in 2021. Nick, appreciate you, brother, and I am out.
All right, so that was part one, because I had another guy I respect too, Bob from I-80. He said something similar. So John June says it's going to be Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, all top 5 players in 2021 for the position. Let's see what Bob had to say.
Hey guys, this is Bob Ventimiglia from I-80 Sports. You can find us i80sports.com or youtube.com/i80 Sports. My take is that the LA Chargers will end 2021 with both a running back and a wide receiver top 5 at their position. And they're going to have a quarterback really close too. Thanks a lot. Have a great show, guys.
All right. So again, 2 guys saying pretty much the same thing here. Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen, top 5s in 2021. So we are going to evaluate. We don't have to say buy or sell, but let's say how likely are these statements? And we can start with Bob on this. What's your thoughts on these 3 guys all being top 5?
To be honest with you, I should go on both of their podcasts, because I'm all in on this one too. Top 5 is pushing it. Top 10, I can pretty much guarantee. We already know last year Herbert was 9th in total points, tied for 8th in consistency. So he's already there. He'll improve this year. Eckler has always been one of my favorite players, that's for sure. He was on fire 2 years ago when he was kind of replaced Melvin Gordon. 88% consistency. He was top 5 in 2019. Probably would have been last year if it wasn't for the injuries. He was at 80%. consistency. And Keenan Allen, again, one of my poster boys for having consistency at the wide receiver position. He's always overlooked every year. He's on so many of my teams on a yearly basis. It's not even funny because everybody's like, oh, he's old, he's done, forget it. No, every year, 70%, 69%, 81% last 3 years. He's the one that may not make top 10 because there's so many damn good receivers. He was 13th and 14th last year. He was 6th in 2019 in total points. He's been top 10 in consistency. I can't argue too much about this one. I mean, maybe Allen's the only one that may not make it, but the other two, I think are a given. But like I said, if you did top 10 for all three, I'm definitely all in on that take.
I like the fact that you are agreeing with kind of what they're getting at, but just maybe making it a little bit more realistic. We'll shift to John. John, what's your take on all three of these guys from the Chargers? Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, all being top 5 guys. So Bob says maybe closer to top 10, but all can be realistically there. What's your take on this?
Yeah, Bob kind of echoed exactly what I was going to say. I just felt like when Phillip Rivers left, I sold Keenan Allen in like 5 leagues saying, yeah, he's not – there's no way there's not going to have another connection like they did with Phillip Rivers and Keenan Allen. And I sold low on Keenan Allen figuring that it's not going to happen. He'll be a top 25, maybe wide receiver. And sure enough, it bit me right in the butt. And Keenan Allen was awesome. And I was like, I think Keenan Allen has a chance to be a top 10 wide receiver, probably not a top 5. Herbert definitely has – they're going to – the offense is phenomenal. So Herbert definitely has the possibility of being a top 5 quarterback too, more likely to be a top 10. And then I'm not as high. Eckler's not a between the tackles kind of guy. He's more of a PPR back. So Eckler being that catching 100,000 balls is going to be great, but I just think he's not going to have all the early down opportunities that, I mean, I know he's a 3-down back, but I think they're going to find ways to just keep him in the passing game. So he'll be a top 10 back in PPR, but I just don't see the top 5 there. So I'm in the top 10 with all 3 of these guys. I think Herbert would be the closest to be the top 5 out of all 3 of these guys. I would say that they're all top 10 players though. So these are great. They're great. If you're starting a draft right now or this year, these would be 3 definitely targets early.
I like the fact that you brought in the questions surrounding Keenan Allen, and you used your own example saying you kind of shift them off because of it. There was a lot of questions about Austin Eckler too when Justin Herbert was going to get the starting gig because they think of Phillip Rivers as that check down master, right? And Justin Herbert in college was not a big check down guy, but it was nice seeing Austin Eckler in games with Justin Herbert. He had games where he had 11, 16, 9, and 9 targets. So he was actually getting some decent volume from Justin Herbert. And another big question, how is Justin Herbert going to transition after being a start out of nowhere in the league? And, Herbert finishes with 6 games with 3 or more touchdowns, 8 games with over 300 passing yards. So he came out flying right away. Keenan Allen, I think you both kind of got to the point. The wide receiver position is super deep, so it's going to be very, very competitive for that. But again, what was he going to be like with Herbert? Well, 10 games with 10 plus targets, 2 games with 19 targets. I mean, this guy was getting fed like crazy from Justin Herbert. So I like this offense as well. I'm a massive Eckler guy. I agree. Maybe we don't look at him as the big rushing ceiling guy, but his yards per carry is actually not too bad in comparison to what people kind of say it is. But I'd say Herbert and Eckler, I can really make a push for to be a top 5 positional player. I think with the depth of the wide receiver position, I might shy away from Keenan Allen being top 5. I think he'd be more towards that top 10, top 12. So you guys are go ahead.
As I say, the other good thing about Herbert right now is his ADP. So he's in that perfect 6th round kind of spot. So you can get like 3 good running backs, receivers, and 2 of the other, and take him in the 6th round. And again, getting a top 5 quarterback or even a top 10 quarterback, that is a good spot. You're not reaching for the Mahomes in round 2 or 3. You're not. I just feel like he's in such a great ADP spot. I love drafting a really good quarterback in round 5 or 6. And I think that's the guy. In fact, I'm doing a mock draft with Murph and the guys from England, and that's exactly what I did. I took Herbert in the round 6, and I feel really good about it because I've got such other really good players in the first 5.
Hey, me and Nick got a draft coming up. We don't need no draft advice here, okay?
That's true. That's true.
But I just think I'm more worried about the sophomore slump for Herbert. That's kind of, he wasn't expected to be the quarterback when the season started last year. He kind of got thrown in. He ran with the job. So this year, a couple of teams got tape on him now. They know what to expect. They kind of seen the offense a little bit. So I expect a little bit of regression on him. That's why I'm not actually saying top 5. But it happens every year. These guys, they come in, they light the league on fire, and then everybody kind of gets a little bit of tape. They slow down a little bit, but they'll be consistent over the course of a career. But I expect a little bit of regression this year.
I think the offense just in general is one to be excited about. And I for one, am high on Eckler, and you can't really go against what we saw out of that rookie. But it is true that we have to think about regression in some areas, but at the same time, maybe they build the playbook more and expand on what happened last year. So good takes on those 3 guys. Let's get to the next one here. I love this video. It's one of my buddies, Gemmo the Icon, and he's rocking some nice gear that you'll recognize in the yeah. So for those of you that are listening on iTunes, Gemmo is one of my best buddies on the Twitter app here. He was rocking the P2W Fantasy T-shirt. I respect that like crazy. But what he held up for you, for those of you that are listening on maybe iTunes or Spotify, he held up signs that said Miles Sanders will be a top 3 running back in 2021. So I'll drop some quick thoughts, and then we'll just go in reverse order here, what we think about this. So devil's advocate for what I will end up finishing with is some people were concerned about, Jalen Hurts' rushing abilities and scheme of play might hurt Miles Sanders, but it actually was false in the small sample size because Hurts took over the job 14 through 17. Miles Sanders in 2 out of 3 of those games had 29.6 and then 18.4 fantasy points. So again, small sample size, but he actually did fairly well with Jalen Hurts. He was actually the RB7 weeks 14, 15, and 16. On the flip side, 4 games under 10 points. I think this offense is continuously evolving and changing. They've added more backs to the system. I'm not scared of Carry On or Jordan Howard or Boston Scott. They did add Kenny Gainwell, but again, we talk about competition for who can finish as a top 5 running back. And I think the inconsistency at times for Miles and the way that this offense is proceeding forward, I'm not really too much into him being a top 3, a top 5, and I think he'd have to really push to be a top 10 back. But I am curious to hear. We'll go to John and then Bob. What your guys' thoughts are for Miles Sanders, top 3, or where you see him in 2021. So, John, what's your thoughts?
I just traded for Miles Sanders in about every league I'm in, so I'm hoping if he's top 3, me and your buddy are going to be in.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
We're in good shape.
Yeah, this is great. I just think that I think Boston Scott's a bigger problem for Kenneth Gainwell than people think. Gainwell's pretty good, but Boston Scott is a pretty good producer. I'm not sure that with 2 passing backs in the offense that Sanders is going to have the opportunity to be a top 3 back. Again, somebody I see in the top 10, I'm pretty happy to get him for what I paid for him. I paid a rookie 109 pick, and then I traded a couple, tier 4 receivers for Sanders, for somebody who was out on Sanders in a couple other leagues. So I just don't see the top 3. Top 10, yes, but not top 3. I think Gainwell and Boston Scott are going to suck up a lot of those targets out of the backfield. And I'm not even sure how much of a passing offense this is going to be with a running quarterback. So, we'll see what happens. I think a lot of Sanders yards will be coming to ground this year instead of in the air. And that's not really a PPR paradise when you're just running the ball all the time. So Sanders top 10, not top 3 for me, but I hope so. I'm crossing my fingers. I'm with you, my guy.
All right. So Bob, what's your thoughts? So I think both John and I said not top 3, maybe fighting for that top 10 spot. Where do you see Miles Sanders maybe in 2021?
Well, I'm not going to be as optimistic, guys. I'm sorry. The last, he's been in the league 2 years, and granted, I get it. The coaching staff has changed. Carson Wentz is gone. and maybe that'll help. But, you also had, I think a pretty solid team there to work with, and hasn't been even top 15 in total points and not even the top 20 in consistency. I have him ranked like RB 17, and I'm kind of comfortable. Like, I was in a league where I went 3 running backs first 3 rounds. I think I was like 6th or 7th pick, so I had like that middle spot. And I took Miles Sanders as my RB3. That I'm comfortable with. That I feel good value. Other than that, this offense is on the grow. It's a project at this point in my mind with Hurts and the receiving core, which is pretty weak. I mean, they have some solid tight ends and Goddard at first days. I just don't feel a lot of confidence in this offense that the opportunities in the system is in place for Miles Sanders to be super successful. I think like I said, I think he's a good solid value as your late RB2 or definitely an RB3, but I'm not sure I can even get even top 15 is tough for me to feel like he can get there. He might, and he certainly has the talent. It's just a question of everything around him that I just don't know if, maybe by the second half of the season, you might see some improvement and some of that kind of meshing together, and maybe you'll see improvement there. And maybe 2022 is his year, but I'm not feeling it in 2021 at this point.
Yeah, I got him as in the leagues I'm talking about. I got Nick Chubb as my starting running back, DeAndre Swift, and
Right.
Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson,
so
and then Miles Sanders.
You're just building for the future. Right.
He's my fourth.
That's a great pickup there. Sure.
He's my 4th running back. So I was more than happy to give away a couple of receivers for that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I think 3 years from now, Sanders could easily be a top 10 back if that system all grows around him and stays, and stays in place, and they add some better receiving cores to kind of take the pressure off both Hurts and the line trying to keep the, 8 in the box kind of thing against him too.
It's funny. I think, John, you are pulling a Houston Texans by hoarding a bunch of running backs, but you have young, good running backs in comparison to what they got going on. But I like a lot of the points. I think this system is not going to be built around Miles Sanders. You see plenty of systems where they scheme up ways to get their running backs, passing volume and rushing opportunities in the right spots. And I think that this offense is going to be schemed in a very specific way that is not surrounded by Miles Sanders' involvement. I think he's going to be involved and get the volume, but I think that the way that they're going to operate is not going to be super focused on, we need to get Miles involved in the passing game and then get him the right touches in the red zone and in these areas. So good points all around by you guys. Next one, we got my buddy Jeff. Jeff actually writes with the Fantasy Footballers, and Jeff also is one of the funniest people on Twitter in the fantasy community. The videos this man drops just got me cracking up all the time, but he's also super smart at the same time, so it's not just all satire. But let's see what Jeff has to say about a hot take.
Yo, Nick, big fan of Play to Win Fantasy. My bold prediction for 2021 in redraft is Deebo Samuel finishes as a top 15 wide receiver. Big fan of Deebo. You can find me at the Fantasy Eng. I'm a writer with the Fantasy Footballers. And got a new pod coming out at the Tackle Dummies pod. Have a good day.
All right. So Jeff popping on here saying that he thinks Deebo Samuel is going to be a top 15 wide receiver in 2021. Let's go with John to start on this one. John, is this something you are optimistic about, or something you don't feel is super realistic?
I hope so. Again, he's one of these guys I have in a bunch of teams, but there's just too much stuff going on in that offense. It's a running team, first of all. They have Brandon Ayuk, Samuel. They have a great tight end in George Kittle, and they have like 18 running backs on the team. So I just don't see that any of the wide receivers on the 49ers team are going to be top 15. Not to like, how do you call it, like draw hairs or whatever, but they'll be real. I think Samuel and Ayuk will be both in the top 20, 22, 25-ish, just because of the distribution. Kittle might have a better season than both of those guys, but there's just too much stuff going around. And the running backs are all pass catching running backs too. So I don't see it. I'm glad he's optimistic, and It's a good call. Debo Samuels was a stud last year. I mean, that guy he's an animal. This whole team is filled with just bruisers, just guys who catch the ball and they take licks and they keep going. And it's like I said before, it's a bunch of boxers on this team. Everybody on this team is a tough guy. They must have to go to these camps and see who's the toughest guy on the team and then draft these guys to put them on the 49ers. Everybody on this team is awesome. They're just guys you want. They're pure football studs, and I love seeing it. But I just don't see that any one player is going to have the production to outplay everybody else.
All right, so Bob, are you more or less or equal to being optimistic about Debo Samuel being a wide receiver 15 than John is?
No, I'm right. I'm right with John. Actually, I'm not even going to give him that much love. I wrote in my consistency guide that I hoped that Samuel could return to 2019's numbers, and that was when he was 30th in both total points and consistency. I think that would be a solid season for Samuel because of Ayuk, because of Mostert, because of Kittle, because of, oh, by the way, they have a rookie running or quarterback. So all of this stuff plays into that again, kind of like Sanders in Philadelphia with Hurts. It's going to take some time for these guys to all get on the same page. I mean, they're doing shorter preseasons. They're doing, lesser preseason games. And that's if they even play in any preseason games. It just seems like, these younger guys, and especially quarterbacks, take a little time to gel. And I just don't see San Francisco offense busting out like crazy. They've got to, if all of their defensive guys are back, their defense usually keeps games close, which means it's low scoring. Yep. So I feel like from a fantasy standpoint, there isn't maybe, I'm a big Mostert fan. I liked him going into last year until he got hurt. But if he's running well and the defense is doing their job, there's not a lot of balls to be thrown around. So that's why I can't even put Sam at this point, maybe top 30 at best.
Where do you guys have the starting quarterback this year for 49ers? I still think it's going to be Jimmy G coming out of the gate. And then I don't think Trey Lance is NFL ready.
He may not be, but I'm not sure Garoppolo's NFL ready.
Yeah, that's a tough call there. At least they're not pulling a Matt Nagy and just saying that there's no way that the rookie's going to start week one. There's no way.
So
that report that came out today. I think there was more to that story, but on the optimism side of Debo, 2019 weeks 10 through 17, he was a wide receiver 9, so he was going off for a string of games there. He had some decent games this year. He only played in 6 games, I believe. Weeks 12 and 13, it was the wide receiver 10. When he went against the Rams, 11 catches for 133 yards and 24.3 fantasy points. But I think there's so many variables in this offense that makes it unlikely. I think seeing Ayuk 5 games in the 20s for fantasy points. He had 4 games with 10-plus targets. And then you had George Kittle, who's missed some time as well. But when he is on the field, he's probably going to command like somewhere between 110 to 120 plus targets and 1,000 yards receiving as well. And at the same time, you have to be healthy to be a wide receiver 15. So, right. Or the wide receiver 15. So I think the combination of different guys are going to be involved, and we're not entirely sure, how pass heavy, how run heavy they're going to be, and who's going to be at the quarterback position, and who's going to get the alpha wide receiver targets, and is George Kittle just still going to be the alpha in the system? I think it's just too tough to be the wide receiver 15 because, as we've said like 15 times on this podcast, there's so much competition, and I think you have to have a lot of things lined up to be a top 15 guy for the wide receiver position. But I'm not going to hate on Jeff for the take. He was optimistic about it. We got one more set of videos here. Again, it's 2 guys saying pretty much the same thing. But this one goes to the running back position, and I'm curious about this one because on Twitter almost every day I see different takes about this guy. So I'm definitely curious to hear what you guys think. But let's start with my guy Lawrence. Lawrence was on my show a while ago with John, actually, ironically, who had one of the earlier takes. But let's see what Lawrence has to say.
What's happening? You already know that boy Cam Akers finna be a top 5 running back in fantasy football. You can get at me on all social media platforms at Lord Don't Lose.
All right, so that's the first Cam Akers take, and then we have another guy right here, and this is one of the youngest fantasy analysts out there. I think he's like 14. But but a super smart individual, man. I'm telling you, the stuff he says on Twitter, he's very smart, and I'm surprised he's doing what he's doing. I think he has a podcast as well, but something similar about Akers.
What's up, everybody? Hutchinson Brown here from the Young Fantasy Mind Football Podcast at TYFMNFL on Twitter. YoungFantasyMind.com is the website. Please go check that out. Anyway, I'm here to tell you guys about my hottest take, and it's that Cam Akers will not finish as a top 10, not a top 8, not a top 5, not a top 3, but the top back in fantasy football. Cam Akers, number 1 overall running back in fantasy football. What do you think, Nick?
So we got two pretty bold statements about Cam Akers for 2021, and I have to get your guys' opinions. I was surprised because I got a handful of video submissions, but two people saying pretty good things about Cam Akers. Bob, are you as optimistic as both of these guys are about Cam Akers in 2021?
If I'm glad I'm not that optimistic. No. Look, I like Cam Akers, and I'll read from the guide. In weeks 12 through 17, he was 80% consistent in those 5 games that he played. Now, a lot has changed. Now they have Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff. There's he's going to be the man. That's a good thing. But again, I don't know. That's a lot. I mean, 80%. If you can be 80% consistent for the entire season, he's definitely top 5. But to be top 2, you're talking McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, Kamara. There's so many people to be top 2 or 3 or 1 that's quite a push. Can Akers be top 10? Possibly. A lot of it is going to depend on, the defense, the offense, everything, I mean, I can't imagine that he's going to run enough or catch enough balls out of the backfield when you've got Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Stafford at quarterback. They never had a top 10 running back in Detroit either. So I find it hard to believe that, with Stafford there, I can't put it together, but I can say the 80% consistent at least gives him some hope for top 10, but higher than top 5, I can't do.
I kind of for these takes and where I place Cam Akers, I'm having a tough time just because the sample size was small, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, weeks 12 through 14, he was the RB10. I mean, he got some good involvement later on in the season. He had that one huge game against New England. He had 21.4 fantasy points, 171 rushing yards. But again, we're banking off of. I think a lot of people are banking off of the Rams. New Todd Gurley when Todd Gurley was in his prime. And I'm not going to say that Cam Akers won't be successful. I get a little nervous putting him so high just because of the sample size, and I didn't look at him as a prospect the same way I personally did as DeAndre Swift, for example. But John, what's your thoughts? Cam Akers, can he finish as high as some of our takes here?
No, first of all, I want to say I started watching or interacting with Hutchinson Brown about a year ago, probably around that time when he first got into Twitter. I think he only had I don't know how many, it was a small amount of numbers compared to what he has right now, but the kid's awesome. Hutchinson, thanks for being part of this fantasy football community. I love hearing your stuff. I love interacting with you. It's just, I'm an old dude now, so seeing young guys like you coming on here and kind of taking the reins, it's super awesome. Hutch, I love your interactions. Keep your spirit up, keep your everything. But I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one. That's they have a guy on this team that's, it's Darrell Henderson is going to take a lot of these carries away. I think he's a great early down back. Cam Akers is a great PPR back. This is going to be a passing team. It's just going to be Cam Akers going to catch a lot of balls out of the backfield, but he's not going to have enough volume with a great secondary back and Darrell Henderson to be that guy. I think it's going to be more of a 70-30 split than a 90-10 that would take for, or 80-20 for Cam Akers to be that guy. So I love your enthusiasm, but I just don't see it.
All right. The last question I have for you guys, and then we'll wrap up this podcast here. It doesn't have to do with hot takes. I actually was in a conversation with a buddy of mine, Wes, from the fantasy community. He's the host of the Fantasy Impact Today podcast. Wes, a great guy. He wanted me to actually ask you guys, since you mentioned earlier, John, when you started playing fantasy, and Bob, I'm sure that you have players across your tenure of playing that come to mind for this question as well. But random question for you guys is, who is your favorite fantasy player you have ever had, you've ever rostered? I feel like I can name a guy recently for me for personal reasons, but I feel like a lot of people have somebody that stands out. Like, I loved rostering this guy on my team. Bob, we can start with you on this. Do you have a favorite guy that comes to mind? Favorite fantasy player you've rostered?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, first off, I've been playing since 1985. So that gives me a lot of years to choose from. I guess I'd probably have to say Peyton Manning, just because I like Peyton Manning as a player. Obviously all of his funny commercials and funny stuff he does. And let's be honest, can you get a more, outside of maybe Brady and Breeze and Rodgers and those guys, can you get a more consistent player every year as your quarterback than Peyton Manning? I mean, so he kind of fills a lot of roles for me. I'm looking forward to meeting him this August at Hall of Fame. I really wanted to drive him, but sadly, I'm number 3 on the list when it comes to years of service, and so obviously number 1 took him. So, but I'm looking forward to at least meeting him and shaking his hand and having a few laughs together. I think I'll go with Peyton.
It's funny when you said who had the rights to picking first based off of tenure. It's almost like a fantasy draft in itself for who gets to drive who. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's what I call it. I call it my kind of fantasy draft. So that's So it's like when I was like, okay, do I take Lynch? Am I going to take Palomalu? And then the guy took Palomalu in front of me. So it's just like real fantasy life.
Just like comparing stats and stuff.
You're really hoping for, and then he snapped. But I'm really excited to meet John Lynch. I always was a big fan of him, as a player and as a GM for the Niners. So hopefully to get some inside scoops from him, like play Mostert all the time, so I can draft him this year and it'll be successful instead of watching him sit on the bench.
Or we'll see like a random live stream that you're taking from your cell phone and just interviewing some questions. But no, that is absolutely awesome. That is awesome. John, same question. You mentioned playing fantasy for a long time. Does one guy stand out as, man, this is my favorite guy to roster at some point?
I've been to Kentucky Derby 3 times, and I've met Peyton Manning, Mike Tice, a bunch of other NFL players that kind of are around the campus when I've been to the Derby. It's a great time. I'm not even into horses. I don't even know who's racing. I have no idea what's going on. We all just throw $10 a person in. Everybody some picks a number. The last race you just bet by yourself. But the Derby's in a great place. A lot of rubbing elbows around it with a lot of big shots around there. But so that's my claim to fame, is I got to shake Peyton Manning and Mike Tice's hand and a couple other NFL players at the Derby time. But I've been playing fantasy football with rosters made up of guys like my favorite player of all time, Dan Marino. Eddie George from the Houston Oilers is on my team. I had Marshall Faulk when he's still on the Colts. I had Mike Allstott, Randy Moss, and a whole lot of retired guys. But the one that sticks out to me the most, who has a special place in my heart, is Jamal Charles from the Chiefs. Because in round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs, just having to win one game to get to ship in 7 different leagues, I watched Jamal Charles run for 20 yards on 8 carries. And I was like, he got 1 touchdown. But in the same game, he caught 8 passes for 195 yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. He scored 65 points by himself. And I also had Alex Smith who threw 5 touchdowns that game. So that gave me that, including the 4 touchdowns for Jamal Charles. It gave me this fantasy stack. And Jamal Charles is still my fantasy sweetheart, because I made it to the fantasy championship, which I won all 7 leagues that year because of Jamal Charles that one game.
That's fantastic.
That is awesome.
That would special.
Those sort of stats will always stick, especially that high of a scoring outing from two guys for sure.
I had the kind of situation happen against me this year when I had to play against Alvin Kamara in about 5 leagues, and that that ruined. It was the opposite of me, Jamal Charles love.
I was playing against a guy in a final who had Kamara, and I had Diggs. and Diggs got like taken out of the game at some point after he was going like absolutely crazy. I was like, leave him in. But no, that is awesome. Again, guys, thank you so much for your time. Again, hit on the Expo, hit on our favorite fantasy player or your favorite fantasy player, and then some of the hot takes. So I do appreciate everybody who contributed to this podcast and actually submitted a video. If we agreed or disagreed, I nothing but respect for the people who think differently and are able to put out a video with your stance there. So I do want to finish the podcast and remind everybody where we can find both Bob and John. So John, can you just remind everybody where we can find you on social media?
You can find me on the Twitter machine at John McGlynn 75. I'm part of the GOAT District, the GOATs with JD running the show over there. The guy's awesome. That's where you can find my show, the Commissioner Evaluation Podcast. And every once in a while, I pop on some awesome podcasts with guys like Nick and Bob, and hopefully see you guys more on this awesome Twitter machine. All
right, and Bob, can you remind everybody as well where to find you?
At Bob_Lung on Twitter. If you're looking to follow the Expo on Twitter, it's at the FF Expo. So you can go there as well. And of course, as we've already talked many times, but I hope to see everybody in Canton, Ohio, weekend of August 13th, 14th, and 15th. Come to sign up for whatever you want to do. If you want to get a booth, you want to just attend, thefantasyfootballexpo.com is the site. We obviously are making an impact because I just saw 3 registrations come through during the show. So
nice. That is awesome.
So just so excited that all of us are going to get together in August. I'd love to see everybody there. And if you want to read the consistency guide in the meantime, of course, go to Amazon and get that. And it's simply under, of course, 2021 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide on Amazon.com. So Nick, thanks for having me. John, pleasure meeting you as well. And I look forward to meeting us all face to face and sharing a few or 10 beers or drinks or something.
So when I go to the Expo, and I show up,
everybody start preparing your liver over the next couple months. You're going to need it.
This is my question. When I get to the Expo and I go to the bar and I order my bucket of beer for myself, what am I ordering, Bob Lung? What am I bringing over to you? And I see you in the corner talking all the big shots.
So that's a good question.
So I am a Captain Morgan guy. So Captain Morgan diet is kind of my go-to. I know it's very boring and very plain, but that's just my thing. Just always had now I'll make other stuff with Captain Morgan, but that's a very simple drink and throw a lime in it just for fun. But yeah, it's
expected.
So I'll give you a quick story. I don't want to bore you guys, but
I found
out a number of years ago, I was allergic to yellow dye 6. Yellow dye 6 is in most manufactured beers. So Coors Light, Miller Lite, anything that's yellow makes me sick. I can drink craft beers. I can drink Killian's. I can drink anything else that doesn't have the yellow dye 6 in it. So that just kind of pushed me towards the Captain Morgan thing, and I've just kind of got hooked on that. So that's what I usually drink. It's just easier, and when you're old and fat, you don't want to get as bloated as fast. So Captain Morgan, I can drink more Captain Morgans than I can beer because the beer would. My whole stomach would just explode and I just lay on the ground. So that's never pretty.
And be sick. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. All right. That is noted. Thanks. John's got that in his back pocket now, and he'll be ready to go for the Expo. But
good diet.
Absolutely. And again, if you liked what you heard about the Expo, go check out the website. Especially if you want to catch some of the people you interact with on a daily basis, weekly basis. The 3 of us will be there. I'm looking forward to seeing people there. So again, thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. Thank you, everybody who listened live or on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, whatever the case was. You can catch this show again on Thursdays. I have my Script to Ships podcast live with Steffi Smalls. That's our weekly show that we do every Thursday. So catch us there. So everybody else, have a nice night.